Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. Today we're going to take a look at green 2-drops. This particular MTG Top 10 is sponsored by Wizards of the Coast as part of the MTG Ambassador program. Use my link in the description to get your hands on Magic's newest set, Wilds of Eldraine, which happens to feature a super powerful green 2-drop in Mosswood Dreadknight. For the purposes of this video, a 2-drop is a 2-mana permanent. Drop is not an officially defined term by Wizards of the Coast. It's only jargon Magic players use, so there isn't a single definition that all Magic players necessarily agree on. Some players have a broader definition, they use it to refer to anything that costs 2 mana, while others have a more restrictive definition, using it to only refer to 2-mana creatures. Others still use the definition I'm going with to refer to 2-mana permanents. This one makes the most sense to me, as something really needs to stick around on the battlefield for it to be thought of as something you dropped there. Anyway, to be eligible for this list, a card had to be green and be a permanent that costs 2 mana. In all, there were 603 cards eligible for this video, and in it we'll look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Green has some really impressive 2-drops, as we'll see, and this is the most stacked video I've done in quite a while. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A first tier top 8 is worth 2 points, this includes events like Pro Tours, and a second tier top 8 is worth 1 point. This includes events like regional championships. Alright, let's take a look at the top 10 green 2-drops in Magic. At number 10, it's Wall of Roots. This green 2-drop is a 0/5 creature with Defender, and once a turn you can choose to put a -0/-1 counter on it to add 1 green mana to your mana pool. Its high toughness can help you live long enough to take advantage of all the mana it can produce. It was played both times it was in Standard in ramp decks as you would expect. It was also played in a variety of extended decks, including Life from the Loam and The Rock. Modern is where it's found the most success, though. It was included in most versions of Birthing Pod, a toolbox deck that also ran some easy-to-assemble combos, and the wall was nice for the deck because it could be used to help you go off with the pod sooner, and then you could sacrifice it to the pod once its usefulness was done. Birthing Pod was eventually banned in Modern, but Wall of Roots has continued seeing play in its spiritual successor, which is a toolbox deck that runs Collected Company and Court of Calling instead of the pod. It also appears in Pauper Wall combo decks, and that's actually where it's seeing the most play these days. It's likely to keep gaining points, and it has a good chance at maintaining a spot on this list. At number 9, it's Den Protector. This green 2-drop is a 2/1 creature that can't be blocked by creatures with less power than it has. It also has Megamorph, which means you can play it face down for 3 generic mana to have it be a 2/2. You can turn it face up for 1 generic and a green, and when you do, it's a 3/2 that returns a card from your graveyard to your hand. It was very easy to get 2-for-1s with Den Protector in Standard, and that made her a very heavily played card. She was especially nasty when combined with at least 1 Death Mist Raptor in your graveyard. You turn her face up, get something back from your graveyard, and then a Raptor returns to the battlefield. Yeah, that's an engine that powered a lot of decks in Standard, especially a deck called Green-White Megamorph. She was heavily played there, showing up in just about all the green decks, and that allowed her to gain over 100 points in that format. However, she's the only card on this list that isn't actively adding points, and while her standard performance between 2015 and 2016 has been enough to make the list so far, Den Protector probably won't be on the list for much longer. She's barely holding on now, and it doesn't look super likely that she's going to gain more points in the future. At number 8, it is Elvish Visionary. By far the simplest green 2-drop on the list, the Visionary is a 1/1 that costs 1 generic and a green, and it draws you a card when it enters the battlefield. While it has benefited a little bit from multiple runs through Standard, the Visionary has seen a ton of play in other formats too. In Extended and Legacy, it's been used in Elf combo decks, which look to cast Glimpse of Nature, then play a bunch of Elves who can tap for mana. They then keep casting more and more Elves to make more mana and draw more cards before winning the game with something like Craterhoof Behemoth. The Visionary is the only elf in the deck that can dig you too deep after you cast Glimpse, and that's pretty important. The extended version of the deck utterly broke the format, and Glimpse got banned as a result, but Glimpse elf decks are still crushing it in Legacy today, and it doesn't look like that's going to change anytime soon. At number 7, it is Outland The Liberator, which is the newest card on the list. This green 2-drop is a 2/2 creature, and you can pay 1 generic and sacrifice it to destroy an artifact or an enchantment. It also comes with Daybound and Nightbound, which means if it's night, the Liberator is instead a 3/3 with the same activated ability, and the added ability of blowing up an artifact or enchantment every time it attacks too. This efficient creature lets you hate on those permanents in your main deck without really giving up a whole lot in terms of power level of your creatures. It has already seen play in every single format it's legal in, and in multiple decks in each format. In Standard, it's largely been played in green aggro. In Pioneer, its most common home has been Jund. It's been played in creature toolbox decks in Modern. In Legacy, it's been played as a sideboard card in Dark Depths. And in Vintage, it's played in Hate Bear. It's going to keep on gaining points going forward. It's just a great utility creature in all of Magic's formats, and that multi-format success means it has a great shot at moving higher on the list. At number 6, it is Oath of Druids. Normally in this series, I like to show the original printing of a card, but Oath of Druids' original wording is confusing enough that I think it's better for us to look at the more recent printing from Commander 2016. Anyway, this green 2-drop is an enchantment, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, it lets that player choose another target player that controls more creatures than they do. Then that first player reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card, and they put that directly on the battlefield. Obviously, this effect is symmetrical, and that can be a problem, but decks in multiple formats, including Magic's most powerful format, Vintage, have found ways to make the effect feel a lot less symmetrical over the years, and this allows them to cheat insane creatures into play in the extreme early game. This is generally accomplished by giving the opponent creatures with something like Forbidden Orchard, and once you do that, you're able to cheat your Atraxa or Gristlebrand into play every time the Oath triggers. Oath is so powerful that it's banned in Legacy, and that means Vintage is the only format it's legal in right now, but Oath decks have been a factor in Vintage for the last 20 years or so, and it's not going to change anytime soon. If you're interested on a deeper dive on the long history of Oath of Druids decks, it is a deck that I covered in my deck history series, so check that out. At number 5, it is Sakura TriBuilder. This green 2-drop is a 1/1 that you can sacrifice to search your library for a basic land and put it onto the battlefield tapped. The Elder, of course, doesn't have good stats, but the fact that this can come down, block, and sacrifice and search up a basic land is an amazing deal. It's basically rampant growth on a stick. And it was an even better deal back when it was originally printed because damage used this stack. That meant you could use the Elder to block an X1, put damage on the stack, and then sacrifice it, and the creature it blocked would die. Even if damage no longer uses the stack like that, the Elder is a great card, and as you might expect, it's pretty much only been played in ramp decks over the years. Some of its highlights include Heartbeat of Spring ramp decks in Block and Standard, Valakut Scapeshift decks, and Amulet Titan decks in Modern. Sakura TriBuilder is still gaining points in Modern right now, but the cards in front of it are also all quite active, so it may never be able to do much better than number 6. At number 4, it is Collector Oof. This green 2-drop is a 2/2 creature that shuts off activated abilities of all artifacts. The design of this card is pretty funny because the art depicts the creature holding Null Rod, and the Oof has an identical effect on the game except that it allows you to also add a body to the battlefield. The Oof was printed in Modern Horizons, which means when it comes to 60-card formats, it's only legal in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, but those are formats where a Null Rod effect is at its best anyway. In all of those formats, the Oof tends to see play in toolbox decks, that is, decks that run hate pieces that can be searched up with cards like Court of Calling or Green Sun's Zenith, whenever they can make a massive impact on the game. For example, right now it's one of the best ways to shut down the One Ring in all of those formats, and in Vintage it even stops the mana rocks at the power 9. There will virtually always be busted artifacts in all 3 of those formats, and as long as that continues to be true, we can count on the Oof continuing to see play in all 3 formats. But as I mentioned earlier, the top half of the list may just stay exactly the same for the foreseeable future, as all the cards are heavily played in multiple formats. At number 3, it is Sylvan Karyada. This 2-drop is a 0/3 creature with hexproof and defender, and it can tap for 1 mana of any color. This is a nice combination, because most mana-producing creatures can be easily killed by 1 mana removal, but with a Karyada in play, you can be all but certain you'll have that extra mana on your next turn. The Karyada was heavily played in Standard, where it was most heavily featured in Abzan decks, but she was also used in Golgari Constellation, various Devotion decks, and even some aggro decks. While most of its points came in Standard, the Karyada has also gained points in other formats, including Block Constructed and Modern, and most recently and significantly, Pioneer, where it's been featured in Niv Mizzet Reborn and Jeskai Ascendancy decks. In Niv Mizzet deck, she helps you get the mana you need to cast the eponymous card, and she combines it with other mana-producing creatures to go infinite with Jeskai Ascendancy, since it will untap every time you play a spell, allowing you to produce more mana, which lets you play more spells. The Karyada has really made a nice home for itself in Pioneer since the format was created, and it's going to keep gaining points there in the future. At number 2, it is Scavenging Ooze. This green 2-drop is a 2/2 creature, and it has an ability that lets you pay 1 green and exile a card from a graveyard. If that card was a creature, the Ooze gets a +1/+1 counter, and you gain 1 life. The Ooze is great because it gives you a main deck way to hate on the graveyard while also getting some additional value out of that ability, including some really nice incidental life gain. While it saw some play in Standard, Modern is really where the card has made a name for itself over the years. It's basically a staple in green decks in the format, with Jund, Abzan, and Collected Company decks common homes for it. It's been played in Legacy Elf decks and 4-color control decks in that format too. Scavenging Ooze is also legal in Pioneer, where it's played in Devotion to Green and a variety of aggro decks. While the Ooze is continuing to gain points, the number 1 card has a lead of more than 200 points, so the Ooze will probably never catch it. And that card is, of course, Tarmagoif. This green 2-drop is a creature with power equal to the number of card types among cards in all graveyards, and toughness equal to that number +1. In most formats, graveyards are easy to rapidly fill, leading to Tarmagoif often giving you an absolutely massive creature that is capable of dodging a wide swath of removal spells while attacking incredibly hard. It has just recently become an even better card now that the battle type has been introduced, allowing Tarmagoif's maximum size to go even higher. While it is just a vanilla creature, in a lot of ways it's one that scales as the game goes on, and is virtually always a threat. Tarmagoif's efficiency has allowed it to have sustained success ever since being printed, and for a time, it was considered the best creature in the entire game. While you would be hard-pressed to convince someone these days that Tarmagoif is still the game's best creature, it is a very powerful one that continues to see play in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage, and that's not going to change anytime soon. It's hard to imagine Tarmagoif ever losing its number 1 spot on this list. So those are the top 10 green 2-drops in Magic. Remember, this video was sponsored by Wizards of the Coast as part of the MTG Ambassador Program. You can use my link in the description to order Wilds of Eldraine right now. Thanks for watching.